Welcome everybody to this sustainability webinar, How to Make a Data-Driven Impact, organized by Bexter and Cohelion. My name is Daan Boersma from Cohelion, and it's my pleasure to host this webinar today. Sustainability is high on the agenda for a lot of organizations, so happy that you all joined this webinar. In the coming hour, you will learn more about what could or should be your main aim with your sustainability strategy, and how to monitor and maintain your sustainability impact with data. Before we have a look at the agenda, I would like to start with a poll. And that poll is, how is sustainability embedded in your organization? Answer A, we're not working on it yet. B, we're doing the basics, but we can or have to do more. C, we have a sustainability strategy and we are busy implementing it. And D, sustainability is at the core of our strategy. I see that we're voting a lot. I see that it's quite divided, but the majority is sustainability is at the core of our strategy, 37% I see. So yeah, it's scattered, so that's nice. Thank you very much for answering the poll. But now we're going to have a look at the agenda for today. As you can see, we have prepared a full agenda with interesting speakers that, of course, I will introduce later. And at the end of the webinar, we have a Q&A to answer all your questions that you have for the speakers. Some practical information. This webinar will be recorded, so all participants who cannot join at this moment can watch the webinar later. And if you have questions for the speakers, ask them in the chat, and we will try to answer all your questions during the Q&A at the end of this webinar. Now I would like to kick off the webinar with our first speakers, and that are Eleonore Hinse-Kuppe. She is Senior Sustainability and Integrating Report Specialist, and Wouter de Waard, Modeler of Environmental Impact at Rebel Group. Eleonore and Wouter share their experience in the fast-changing sustainability world. And in their presentation, they will discuss what trends and regulations are coming up and how organizations can use data to measure, monitor, and improve their environmental footprint. I'm very curious to hear a story, Eleonore and Wouter. So for now, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Well, the first picture just to show how big Rebel is, because many people think that we are much smaller. We are over 225, and well, the headquarters is in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, but we are all over the world. But I think what's much more important is well, the questions we are well trying to answer you in the next 15 minutes. I will tell you something what's happening in the sustainable world, and after me, Wouter will tell you what companies can do tomorrow. And I think that's even more important because I think that's a lot and also interesting to do. But well, first, what's happening in the sustainable world? And I think there's also happening a lot because of the EU, who obliged financial institutions to report on the on sustainability for the companies and well, all their investments. And so they have to gather all sustainability data of their investments. And so they have to ask the companies they invest in those data. And so that makes that company A is asking company B and C, etc. So it's well, I think it's a chain coming on, and to make it that, well, also that all the companies can be compared together. The EU also is in the process of developing new sustainability guiding lines for reporting called the CSRD. You might have heard of it. And those, I think these will be obliged from 2024 on. It's still not sure, it's still debating, but well, I think they will be obliged from then on. And so, well, this has a huge impact, I suppose, on many of you as well. And well, the ball is rolling and you can still run away, but well, I think it's a good thing to decide for yourself whether you want to be like Tommy and Annika and a bit slow. And then you might also be too late because, well, it's quite a lot of work to comply. Or you can more be like Pippi and, well, turn the pain into a gain. And this is really possible because, well, if you think about sustainability and what it means, I think at this moment, and well, that might be different for your companies, as many people said that sustainability is in the core of the business. But I think still many companies, the focus is mostly on financial value and less on the non-financial value, and also on the social and especially on the social and the environmental results. Well, you might know that Philips has a profit and loss and environmental profit and loss, and there are some more examples. It might be interesting to have a look at this. Well, if you really want to be, well, literally sustainable, I think you should take all those values into account. And for example, on social value, well, negative effects, I think many people know some, like child labor. Positive effects might be that you train people in the companies you're working with in other countries far abroad, like Smith & Zone is doing with the safe use of chemicals. And so they really take care of safety in the different companies. For the environmental side, you will hear an example later on. Jesse will tell you a lot about it, and this will show that it is possible to have a positive environmental result. But well, if you have to choose, because you have to decide what subjects are important for you and are, well, what you call material, I think so far many companies, and that might also be the case for your companies, they only looked from the side of what is the impact of the company on the planet and on society. But what is changing now from now on is that in the guiding lines, the CSRD, they oblige you also to have a look the other way around. What is the impact of the changing world on my company? And this might seem, well, a bit strange, but just to give you an example why it is very important is Lamb Weston. They process potatoes, and well, for them, the climate change has a huge impact on their profitability because, well, because of the dryness, there's less crop, and so they have less margin. I think this is a very clear example of a sustainability risk. And of course, there are also opportunities. Well, think about the technical companies, the energy companies. I think they have quite a lot of opportunities right now. But it's not only that you have an increasing demand for data and reporting because of the financial institutions and all the new regulations. Of course, there's also an increased demand for strategy and for improvements. And I think that's something Wouter is going to tell you about more, and he will make it more tangible. What I have told, he will make more tangible with an example.
And here we have to switch.
Yes.
Hi all. So yeah, the second part of this webinar is going to be about, our presentation is going to be about what companies can do tomorrow. And we're going to discuss this by following a case study of a food supplier. So We have a food supplier X, FSX, and this is a company that supplies food and cabin products like bed, linen, those kind of things to large ships. And they have two types of clients, offshore ships and merchant navy. FSX has an international network of local suppliers and handlers, and their clients start asking, what is the environmental impact of catering? If we order at you, what is then the environmental impact? So FSX called us and asked us, can you help us understand our environmental impact? Can you help us quantify it? And can you help formulate a strategy? And before we dive in, I just want to sketch our two commonly used approaches for impact analysis. We have the company impact, which looks at all the activities in scope 1, scope 3, and scope 2 of a company. This includes business travel, energy bills, those kind of things. And there's a product impact that's doing a life cycle analysis on one or more products. And one of the standards you can follow is the ISO 14040 standard. There are several to follow. And in this case, because we look at the supplying of one ship, so it's just one activity in the large company, we did the product impact analysis. Okay, so to understand and to quantify the impact, there are a couple of steps to follow. So first we define the scope, we draw the system, and I will show you how we did that later on. We collect data, we model, and then we present and discuss the results. And after we did that, it's time for some next steps. And you can take a lot of routes, but I will get back to you on that too. So first of all, we define the scope. And when you talk about impact, it's very important that you actually know what impact is, so that you have a clear definition. So for this case, for FSX, we looked at the global warming potential in kilograms CO2, the water use, and the energy use. And the planning was laid out as follows. So we started to do it, start the whole analysis for one ship for 1 year. So we just started local to see how that would work, how the supply chain would look. Then when that was done, we scaled up to include all, I think it was 1,000 ships total. And then afterward, we built interactive dashboards. Before we can really start, we need to draw the system. And with drawing the system, in this case, I mean the life cycle analysis. So what is the full life cycle or supply chain, or what's going on actually? So upstream, we have the production of food and the transport of food. On board, we have the use of food, for example, cooling it or baking it. And downstream, we have the disposal of waste. And for each of these life cycle steps, we then collect data. And just to give you a sense of what type of data you can collect or what type of data you could collect as a company yourself, for production, we often look at the weight of goods per type of goods. So it was long lists, order lists, the weight and type of packaging. Is water packed in PET bottles or is it packed in boxes? And we take into account relevant assembly steps. For transport, we look at the total weight, the average distance, and the transport mode. So are you using ships, trucks, planes, those kind of things. For the storage on board, we looked at the freezers and the coolers. So what is the average amount of goods that is stored in a cooler and a freezer per day? And how many energy does that require? We could also look at the cooking and baking impacts, but for this case study, we did not include those, but I've listed them just to show that they are there. And downstream, we look at the percentage split of goods disposed on board versus in the port, because those have a different impact. And of course, the disposal methods for both locations, like incineration, landfill, recycling of plastic packaging, maybe, those kind of things. So halfway in, we have our data, we have our system, we have our scope. It's time to start modeling. And in general, we combine two types of data. So there's the client data, that's the data I just discussed, and we combine that with environmental data. And environmental data is coming from a database. We often use EcoInvent, but you can also use data from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol or any other database. Then we use the FAST modeling standard. That's an international modeling transport standard that promotes transparency. And in the end, you get a dashboard. This can either be in Excel, Power BI, Tableau, any dashboard. Okay, we present and we discuss the results. To show you, this is one of the dashboards we built just as a first setup. Okay, what can we do? So on the left-hand side is ship A, and on the right-hand side is the comparison. So here you can select the category. Are we going to compare offshore ships or merchant navy ships? What's the fleet? And what is the ship within the fleet? On the right-hand side, we then select the comparison. Do we want to compare it to one other ship, or do we want to compare it to the fleet average? In below, you can see the impact. And as you can see here, the production impact is very high compared to, for example, transport, use of disposal. One of the reasons disposal is so low is because the majority of food gets eaten and therefore there is no disposal. So once we have this, we can do a lot of analysis on this, and this is not just a dashboard, there's a lot below it that explains differences. But then it's time to discuss with the client what are relevant next steps. Some clients choose to improve the analysis, to zoom in on some assumptions or on the data collection process. You can also develop a sustainability roadmap. How do you want to improve? You can engage stakeholders either within the company or outside the company. Or you can decide, okay, now that we have this, we want to comply and align with the standards that are already mentioned by Eleanor. Our client, FSX, decided to determine a team of data scientists to build the same dashboard we built in their own online environment for their clients. And they asked us to help them with the sustainability roadmap. Just have a quick look how we're doing time-wise. Oh, perfectly fine. So I'm going to zoom in on the sustainability roadmap. What's very important in designing a sustainability strategy or roadmap is that you know where you are in the life cycle or in the supply chain, where do you want to reduce your impact. So in this case, for example, production has a very high impact, so it might be worth starting there. But it's also good to take into account what level of control do I have. And if you have a high level of control, that's the low-hanging fruit, that's often close to your core operation, your core activities. Further out, we have the circle of influence, often partners and clients, sometimes suppliers, depends how the contract with your suppliers is, and the circle of concern. That's often the industry, and in this case for FSX, for example, the ports. They cannot really change how waste is treated in the ports, but they could try. And just to give you one example, how that would then look like if we ask ourselves the question, how to decrease the impact in the production phase. And up high, there's a high level of control, and down low, it's a low level of control. The most important thing FSX can do is decrease the amount of unnecessary kilograms ordered. So every ship throws away food. If you can maximize efficiency, less food gets thrown away, less food gets packed, less food gets transported, gets cooled. So that lowers the impact on the full life cycle. A bit further out, but still relevant, is decrease the amount of packaging. So if you can package more efficiently or with more sustainable materials, you can lower your impact. This is then followed by stimulating a climate-friendly diet. You would need the cooks on the ships to get this done. But if you can change the kilograms of meat to vegetarian alternatives or increase the amount of vegetables in general, that would lower the overall impact because meat has a higher impact per kilogram than the veggies. And then the most far out is that, okay, we're not going to change anything of the above, or everything of the above, but we're going to also talk to the farmers and make sure that if it's ordered, the food is produced in a sustainable and biodiverse way. And what helps in providing a discussion and what helps in our conversation with our client is that you can then see, okay, what is then the impact per kilogram of food? This is just CO2, but we also have it in water and energy. That's it. Thank you very much. And Dan, I will hand over the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Wouter, and of course also Eleanor, for sharing the insights with us, especially the developments or new developments in sustainability world. Before we are going to our next speaker, we first have another poll that of course has a nice link with the presentation of Eleanor and Wouter. We're curious, to hear, is your organization already prepared for the new upcoming regulations that Eleanor and Wouter talked about? As you can see, 3 answers. Yes, we've been working on this for a while. B, yes, but I think this will have a minimum impact on our organization. And C, no, but I'm glad I'm aware now. So let's see. I see that we already have quite some votes, but we're still voting. I see that all the answers are quite divided. So 32% for yes, we've been working on this for a while. 35% yes, but I still think this will have a minimum impact on our organization. And C with 32% no, but I'm glad I'm aware now. So thanks all for voting again. Quite divided. Of course, if you want to know more information about the regulations that are coming up, you can always contact Eleanor and Wouter. Now it is time for our second speaker. And I will like to introduce him. Jesse Sels has taken on the role of EMEA president at Tosca since September 2020. His success as a co-founder of Controload is now leveraged at Tosca in the development of reusable load carrier solutions for the supply chain in Europe and of course the rest of the world. Using real-life examples, Jesse will discuss trends and his experience as global leader in reusable packaging solutions. And of course, which load carrier is more sustainable in his opinion, a wooden pallet or a plastic pallet. So really curious to hear your story, Jesse. I would like to give the floor to you.
Thank you, Dan. Hi everybody, good afternoon. Don't have a slide of anybody like Pippi Langkous, but it did remind me a little bit of Kermit the Frog actually saying it's not easy being green, right? But I don't think we have a choice. So if you want to be green, you need to start collecting data. You need to, face the challenge and find the opportunity in the challenge, as Eleanor and Wouter were saying. And if you are green, or if you have achieved some greenness, let's say, then it's okay to show the world and actually come out and say that, hey, we've done a great job there. So others can, learn from your example. And that's why it's nice to see these examples. We've got some of that in the presentation as well, because we set up our sustainability team in 2021 with the global sustainability director and then local sustainability managers. And the first result they've achieved is in this year as well, that we got the EcoVadis gold medal, which I think is great. Moving on to the presentation. Yes. So for those who don't know Tosca, shame on you, but we are a global leader in reusable plastic packaging solutions. So that sounds nice. We are actually it's an American company, founded 60 years ago. And in 2019, they came to the European part of the world and took over polymer logistics. Polymer logistics is a plastic pooler who works downstream, so last mile into the retail. And in 2020, shortly after the first takeover, they took over the company that I helped found, which is Controload. And now we are one global company. As you can see from the picture, we have a huge range of products. I think it's one of our USPs is the fact that we have anything from a bin that transports potatoes to eggs to liquids and even e-commerce crates. So we have our own production, but we also, at the core, we are a pooling company. A pooling company is a company that actually takes reusable packaging and maximizes the reuse, right? So, which means helps to redesign, manufacture, delivers, does all the transport, cleaning, repairing so that they can be reused, following with recycling if it becomes unusable. So that is the core of our business. And the uniqueness of what I just mentioned of Polymer Logistics and Tosca coming, purchasing Controlload and making it into one company, is that at the end of the day now, we have our assets circulating, as they say, from farm to fork and back. And over time, I think this will be a great a USP for our company so that we can service the whole supply chain. Today, we are mostly in the food and FMCG. So the packaging ingredients into the food producers, into retail and back, transporting everything you see in front of you. So a quite broad range of industries as we have a broad range of products. And that on 2 continents. So we have service centers all over the US, as well as all over Europe, and expanding now into Turkey as well, and our factories in Israel. So we have a big customer base there as well. So it's a fast growing group. But the topic of today is wood versus plastic pellets. And then, of course, what does that have to do with sustainability and also traceability? So I think just taking a picture of where we are in time, because when I started almost 20 years ago, there was already a lot of talk about wood versus plastic and why use one and why use the other. And is one more expensive than the other? Is one more sustainable than the other? Today's world is one of rising costs. I think you all know wood, metal, aluminium, plastic, recycled plastic, energy. Everything is increasing, and not just with a couple of percent. Right? You have the war, global warming. You had the whole COVID pandemic. Shipping prices all over the world are out of control. So we're in a very unique situation at the moment as a European continent, let's say. And then we have legislation, already mentioned earlier, is that a certain percentage of recycled material needs to be in packaging and so forth. So this is not making life easier, and also creating availability problems for some of this recycled material. The positive side is that tracking technology, tracing technology is evolving very fast and is getting cheaper. Although chips are not readily available, where we used to pay 30 euros for an IoT tracker, we can already start halving that and even halving the half of that. So it's really evolving fast. And we've set up Tosca Asset IQ to meet those demands. And we are actually actively real-time tracing quite a few assets. We're up to 100,000 assets at the moment. So this is really taking off at the moment. We see at our customer sites also an increased level of automation, probably also because wages have gone up, labor availability is a problem. So you see automation go up, which then asks for a higher performance of any pellet, wood or plastic. So in this brave new world, let's say, there's one thing which is certain. We need to find, with whichever material you use, the maximum reuse of assets, right? And once they break down, the maximum reuse of the raw material. And in my opinion, and that would be weird if it was not my opinion, it's probably better to use something else than wood. So what's wrong with reusable wood? Actually, there's nothing wrong with reusable wood. It's a great raw material. I think pooling of wood and pellets has a bright future and is a very good thing. And doing the analysis you see in front of you, which sort of links in with Eleanor and Wouter, this is done by our team. It shows that a virgin plastic pellet, a quality, high-level, reusable virgin plastic pellet versus a reusable quality wooden pellet, that you will probably need to use a plastic pellet 10 times more than a wooden pellet to be more or less at the same level of fossil fuel use, which is what we talk about most of it. So why would you switch? Because does it last 10 times longer? It can, but it doesn't always. So in the past, up to this point, in the B2B world, people switched from wood to plastic for hygiene reasons, for legislation which has nothing to do with the sustainability part of the story. It has all to do with the hygiene regulations in the food world. So those were the main reasons for switching to plastic. But bear in mind that pellet manufacturers are the biggest softwood users in the world. Wood is a fantastic raw material, and it has a future in pellets. But I would rather see it in houses. Some people say, why? Well, we're going to use cardboard. Well, cardboard is wood, right? It's a derivative of wood. So if they are both equal, why would I use plastic? Well, I think plastic has the qualities to move away from wood if you start playing with it, let's say, which we have been doing for a while. So first of all, you start using more recycled material, which changes the picture you saw earlier, and even start using post-consumer waste. The second thing is you start redesigning a pallet, reinventing a pallet, which is very difficult with wood, but is very much possible with plastic. And then, of course, adding technology is easier to a plastic pallet than a wooden pallet. And you can start avoiding losses. And if you have less losses, you increase the efficiency. And if you increase the efficiency, you need less assets. And therefore, you will have a positive impact on the environment. Also, producing a plastic pallet takes a lot more energy than a wooden pallet. But if you start using green energy, and you start working on reducing the weight of the plastic pallet, which is easier to do with a plastic pallet than with a wooden pallet, there are a lot of ways to move away from this, let's say, equal status. For example, here you see a picture of a pallet which is 100% produced from post-consumer waste. Right? We used LLDPE, shrink foil, Tetra Pak, caps, and there's even some aluminium in there from coffee caps. So, and this pallet can be fully recycled back into the same pallet. So if you do something like this, what is the effect on the raw material and the waste? So you see that 25% reduction can be achieved versus, in this case, a virgin pooled pallet. So I call it a circular pooled pallet, would reduce the CO2 emissions with 25%. So that's already a good start. And if I compare it to the wooden variation, of course, we're going to come up around about the same 25% reduction that we can achieve by changing the raw material. Now, we have invented something which does what a wooden pallet does, a good wooden pool pallet, which is a nestable rackable pallet. We call it NERA. Now, this pallet, for example, it's a brand new invention, if you can call it that, but it's a brand new way of looking at a pallet. It is a plastic pallet. It is nestable. You can see the space saving it gets you, but mostly the space saving it gets you on a truck when transporting empties. It's also fully recyclable, so that's not a problem. We can either make it from virgin material, and then it will save 25% as well, or we can make it from post-consumer waste, and then that 25% you can add to the former 25%, and you're already at a 50% CO2 reduction. So that is quite spectacular. Now, then you have technology, right? So this is a picture of our Tosca Asset IQ, which is directly linked, by the way, to the Track Online, or will be linked to Track Online. It's still on Avalanche, but it's linking to Track Online soon. So it's a good collaboration we have with Bexter on this, is that by knowing where something is, we can start predicting where something is, and we can start preparing to deal with seasonalities, increase in demand, decrease in demand, and we can really increase efficiency and have higher pickup quantities, faster turnaround, so we need less assets. With all of this, you again reduce the way you can work with plastic pallets. You reduce the sustainability impact. So for me, a conclusion, we can get to a more sustainable supply chain using plastic pallets. Leave wood in the forests is an interesting statement, but increasing the recycled plastics and preferably using post-consumer waste, we can get to quality pallets because technology has evolved. If we can then combine it with nestability, so reusability and nestability, especially in areas like the US with huge distances and high transport costs, you start saving costs as well as CO2. Using the track trace pool, because a pooler will always, in theory, do a better job than you setting up your own pool because you share resources with other companies. You will see that you will need less assets. We have cases that prove this. Less empty miles, less losses, so less material used. Then greener energy. Well, you come to a point where plastic starts beating wood with a big percentage. And most of all, we need to stop using one way. And then it says unless, because I'm also part of this initiative, which I think is fantastic, is that you start producing pallets from something completely different. And there's this team of guys who is starting to produce pellets from coconut waste in the Philippines, which then at the final destination, you can regrind and turn into a soil improver. I love these kind of innovations. That's why I'm mentioning it, is yeah, sometimes one way, if done right, can even be more sustainable than the returnable parts. So I just want to give that as not everything one way is bad if you start looking for the solutions, which was the beginning of the speech, was find the opportunity in the challenge, which goes for your company as well as raw materials and pellets. Dan, I'm going to hand it back to you. That was my part.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I think it was a very interesting story. I see that we have a lot of questions also in the chat based on your presentation, but we're trying to answer them during the Q&A. For now, it's time for our last speaker, and that is Kevin Miedema. In his role as technical director at Bexter, he's responsible for innovating a software platform for reusable load carriers, like Jess already mentioned. And sustainability is high on the agenda. And one of the main goals is to provide software that enables the transition towards a circular economy, but also to sustainable supply chains. During this presentation, Kevin will elaborate how Bexter and Cohelion are developing new solutions to measure and monitor sustainability KPIs. Kevin, looking forward to your story. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. All right, so you've got the data from outside of your company and you've chosen the right material. And now what? So yes, I just told you about the choice of assets, which you could, well, suit your needs and decision you need to make because of that. And before that, we saw Wouter talking about the financial values and the costs that are important to think about. So at Bexter, we create applications like Avalanche and Dracoline, like Jesse mentioned, for asset poolers such as Tosca and others, of course, to manage all of those asset movements. But if we're looking at downstream, upstream, we view everything basically as a transaction. It's either a movement from A to B that could include multiple stops and handovers. So if we look at a random supply chain, so something I'll use in this example is something going from a factory to a warehouse, perhaps to a store retailer, and eventually at someone's home. But that could be one of the many supply chains, of course, where we can look at the impact of, well, asset movements and where parameters should be set. So if we're going to look at any given supply chain, you're able to set up parameters between different addresses, for example, or from a whole flow of movement being initiated until delivered. So I'm going to elaborate a bit on a few parameters, but also think about, well, one of the following steps to keep in mind, like such as minimum and maximum values at your depot, so things don't get overheated, or minimums for collection purposes, or what's available or non-available to make an optimized decision on return movements. Deciding if you want to drive in the holidays or weekends, or if you ship in holidays or weekends. And especially what we feel is looking towards full truckloads. So optimizing your trips to make sure that you create the most green transaction you can basically create. And also one of the, what I think most of, a very important topic is the distance between two different addresses. I can drive from Monaco to Berlin, for example, but if I have to cross the Alps, the distance will have well, zero impact, but the route that a truck has to drive could have a big impact on where I need to, well, move my transactions or at least my assets back and forth. So if we're going to look at sustainability parameters, the guys previously already talked about the other maintenances, average lifetime, of course, where we can discuss cycle times, but I'd really like to focus on transport and truckloads. So what we see is that if our customers start setting up their preferred metrics on where they would like to have their, well, at least their sustainability goals set up on, we can go much further into those instead of trying to do everything. So there's a lot of companies who look at delivery rates, collection costs, how we can reduce those. So if we're only solely looking at, for example, transport and truckloads in this example, and breakage and loss rates, I think we can help customers giving the idea of insight based on the data that is available within your systems. So I'll give you an example later on as well. So what I would like you to do is to look at your own company and see which of these metrics you find valuable. Try to give these an indexation, basically. So give them a priority in your decision-making engine. And when I'm going to talk about the decision-making engine, we can look at something like a regression model, for example. So nowadays you read a lot about machine learning, artificial intelligence, algorithms, etc. So there are a lot of models you can choose from, but which of the models is the best one for your specific situation? So that's where we need to decide, okay, which variables do we want to include? Those were the variables I mentioned earlier, of course. And how much historic data do we use to come up with a good model? And what do we do if a model isn't good enough? So we did a lot of testing on different models, for example, for detection of offsets. And we came up with a decision tree regression model. So for example, for our anomaly detection, where we detect anomalies within the movements that you create within maximum truckloads or an offset in quantities, we see that we chose a decision tree regression model in this case. So I can elaborate later on all the other choices as well. But the foremost reason for that is because we want the quick result. So we want our users to directly get a result. You give an input in the application, you directly get a result based on a regressional model. So Wouter already elaborated on decision making in regards to data, so I'll skip that part right now. But this model basically predicts the value based on some decisions. So let me give a small example with the sheet in front of you. In the image, you see a decision tree to predict the price of a house. So the variables that were used here is to create a prediction, is the surface of a house, the amount of bedrooms you have, the age of a house, and based on these variables, a decision is made that directs you to one of the branches and further on. So eventually you come at the end of a branch where you can find the predicted price of the house. So according to this decision tree, a house larger than 160 square meters, having more than 3 bedrooms and built less than 10 years ago, would have a predicted price of about 510,000 euros. This is, of course, an oversimplified decision tree, but the principle is pretty much the same. So how do we use this on a daily basis is basically by saying, okay, so for instance, you have a transport always going from location A to location B with a pallet and a quantity of 40. And the model will always predict the quantity of exactly 40. That's of course easy. So I say the word always because it will always have to do the same thing. So the prediction model has a very easy job and predicts it with 100% certainty. However, in most cases, this never happens. So yes, I already talked about, okay, if we can eliminate stack heights for empty truckloads, I think it's very easy to work with full truckloads. But however, there is also multiple different assets in one and the same transaction. So the model gets to do more and more work. And that's why we chose this specific calculation method. So because these models cannot predict most of the time with 100% certainty, we calculate around an interval within the prediction. This means that if the model predicts a quantity of 40, we'll tell you as the user, so the user interface, which you see in the right side, will tell you that we expect something between 0 and 2400 in this example, but the user or another system has entered a quantity of 1 million or 100,000 or 500 million. So we can see offsets in data. This is not only being used in anomalies, but you can also use this for various reasons. And regarding the sustainability topic, I think these are the key points in regards to max truckloads, the amount of kilometers that a truck is driving, reducing CO2 emissions will be a great way to see if you are creating the right kind of shipment. Not that a shipment cannot be created, but the system can evaluate, okay, well, is this the correct transaction and should we process it? So how more fluctuating your data is, the lower the accuracy of the model and how big are the prediction intervals. So in my example, it's between 0 and 2400, but we also have customers who can, quite easily see, okay, my transactions are up to a certain standard. And a very easy way to see this as well is to, basically check the combination of two addresses and checking the day of the week that you're doing that, the week number, the month. So for example, during Easter in the retail business, these kind of decision-making units need to have multiple years of data to make sure that whenever you do something with an Easter, you're going to make perhaps very weird decisions because it's extra busy. You're not looking at the most optimal routes, but you're looking at the quickest routes because you have a supply and demand which is all over the place. And of course, you can look at the asset type. So lastly, a second example, going back to the breakage and loss rates where I started with is, so we have gathered a lot of data, but want to look at the dashboard as a user. So as a user, you want to see something, and you want to act on it. So within our application, we can just give you a pop-up, hey, this is about to happen. Do you agree with what we calculated? But there's also a way of creating dashboards like Wouter and Eleonore said. So we've created a set of standard dashboards, which we want to share with you as well. And this one specifically is not completely ended towards the sustainability goal, but more towards, reducing or finding leaks. Okay, where do my assets get lost at most likely, or where are the most repairs? So you can find where things go off and where you need to, for example, create more return shipments. And based on those return shipments or return truckloads, could be very costly for you as well. So based on the data within our platform, we would like to help you to determine your sustainability goals and visualize them in this case, Track Online Insights. We'd love for you to join our roundtable events as well, where we discuss these topics. So feel free to sign up for those. And Dan, I'll give it back to you. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Kevin. It was a nice story with some nice examples. Before we move to the Q&A, because I already saw some questions, but please ask your questions during the chat or in the chat. We will try to answer them in a couple of minutes. Before we do that, we have a last poll, which is going to show up right now. And that last poll is: does your organization use data to measure, monitor, and improve its environmental footprint? So first answer, no, we first need a clear sustainability strategy. B, no, but we are struggling to collect the right data. Yes, we have clear sustainability KPIs and monitor them regularly. And D, yes, and we are completely CO2 neutral. I already see the results coming in. It's quite impressive to see that 45% at the moment says, yes, we have clear sustainability KPIs and monitor them regularly. That's a good sign. Okay, that's finished. Yeah, so only 4% yes, and we are completely neutral. So we have a long way to go there. But the good sign is that we have a lot of organizations or people participating in this webinar that have said, yes, we have clear sustainability KPIs and monitor them regularly. So thanks for voting again. Now it is time for the Q&A. So I hope that all the speakers can also unmute their microphone. I already saw 2 questions coming in during the presentation of Jesse. One of them is, did you also take the reuse and the deposit of wood pellets into account while comparing with the plastic alternative, Jesse? Can you maybe answer that question?
Yes, we did. But I will give a few more words. No, I think in general, if you would like to know in more detail what is behind the numbers that I've shown you, then I would just suggest you send me an email or via you, Dan, and we will gladly share the details of how we calculated everything. So we are completely 100% transparent. So if you want the underlying data, or you want to connect to our sustainability team and get an explanation, we will gladly provide that in any detail you like. So just send me an email and we will get it to you. But yes, we did take it into account.
Okay, thank you very much. I have another question for you, Jesse. Is there any LCA report or data set available to substantiate the claim that plastic pellets needs 10 times higher GHG compared to wood?
It's not 10 times higher. It is but I understand the question. And yes, we have an underlying study, which we will gladly share with you. I guess I don't want to go into detail now because that's not the forum, but if you would like to receive that, then just send me an email and our sustainability team will gladly share it with you. Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I see a new question coming in, and I think that one is nice for Eleanor and Wouter. Question is from Johan about the last poll. Do you have any suggestions for collecting sustainability KPIs? We'd like to go further than just stating ambitious targets. We have so many applications that contribute, and it involves a lot of manual work.
Okay, you want me to? Okay. Yes, so there are a lot of different tools around that can help you collect the data in a structured way and determine which KPIs are relevant. However, I would suggest to see what you can come up within your company, just to see, okay, what kind of data do we have? Is that one format? Can we collect all that data, for example, in SAP or in one system, and then start looking to APIs to connect that data, for example, to sustainability dashboard, impact dashboard, those kind of tools. I hope that answered the question. That there's a very large world with regards to data, but if you can list it yourself, what kind of data do I have and from what type of sources, that already is like 50% of the work. And then you can start looking, okay, how do we combine those sources?
And of course, if Wouter doesn't answer your question, you can send him an email, because I suppose that you are getting the presentations and the email is in there, so he can answer it as well.
Yeah. Okay, well, a lot of emails needs to be sent. Are there any other questions? We have time for one last question, so if you have them, please send them in the chat.
I did see one down about retail acceptance and plastic pallets.
Yeah.
So,
what was the question, Jesse?
It's a good question. Well, plastic, it's all fine and well, of course, but what about retail acceptance? Because without retailers accepting plastic pallets to be entered into their supply chain, then you can show everything you like, but in the end, the retailer decides. So there is retail acceptance at the moment for a number of pallets, even to the extent that most plastic pallets pooled in the retail are actually retail owned. So you have Aldi that have their own half pallets in Germany. You have Lidl that is pooling across Europe their own half pallets and now also Euro pallets. You have Logifree in Spain supplying into Mercadona. So everybody's sort of looking for their own wood replacement for financial and sustainability reasons. So that's half pallet, and I know that's also Euro pallets. Mercadona has them, and now also Lidl. So we are working on this as well from our side, and I think 2022 will be the year of the launch, not just Tosca, but in general of several, let's say, updated half Euro and industrial size pallets, which are requested to be pooled by retailers. So this means that the biggest request for plastic that we get at the moment is coming from retailers. So there is a big change. Probably has to do something with the price levels of wood and the availability of wood and the problems that has really boosted the requests we're getting from retailers. The problem with plastic is if you want to start tomorrow and the retailer says, I'll have 4 million pallets, it's not like a wooden pallet. You can't produce it that fast. So you need a more mid and longer term planning on how to enter all of that into the supply chain. But currently the answer is it's not just retail acceptance, it's becoming a retail request.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jesse. I see that we have one more last question from Matt Cole. The question is, I often hear that CEOs, I think CEOs, will need to measure CO2 across the whole chain. When will this prevalent mandatory requirement, in your opinion? Wouter, can you answer that one?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good question. So what we currently see is that scope 1 and scope 2 emissions are already kind of mandatory or expected and will become mandatory soon. Scope 3 emission is about the whole supply chain, and that's not yet to become mandatory. So it's not yet clear when that regulation is going into place, but we do see a lot of activity on this topic. So we did a large project for the European carbon tracking system, where we did a pilot for a bottle of PET, to see if we could include all data from the full supply chain. And I can send a link to that report later on, or with the slides, but that already shows how difficult it is to track a full supply chain, but that indeed it becomes more and more important. So not mandatory yet, but to be expected or continued.
Okay, thanks. That was the last question for this webinar. Yeah, it's good to mention, also to conclude this webinar, we have discussed a lot, from regulations to the choice of wood and plastic, and also the use of software and data. If you would like to continue the conversation about sustainability, we are organizing a couple of roundtables, hopefully face-to-face, differently than a webinar. So if you're interested, we would like to organize that within a couple of weeks. And it would be nice that there are a lot of stakeholders within the supply chain that would like to think along with us. So if you're interested, scan the QR code, and you can just sign up with your details. And I think my colleague Sophie also shared the link in the chat, so that's also a possibility. Yeah, so that's it for now. We will send the sheets, but of course also the recording of this webinar to you all who have registered via the link. For now, I would like to thank all the speakers. So Eleanor, Wouter, for your participation. Jesse for a very nice presentation, and I hope everyone get a new insight what is sustainable, more sustainable in his opinion, wood versus plastic, and of course, Kevin, what you can do with data with regards to sustainability. Thank you very much for your participation. If you're interested in to continue the conversation, sign up for the roundtable. That's it for now. Thank you very much.